A few weeks back, I put out a video talking about my first experience with the remaster of the original Romancing Saga 2. I recommend going and checking out that video before watching this review, because that video will definitely give you a better idea of what Romancing Saga 2 is all about from a base level. Now, a couple of quick things before I start to dig in. First off, I would describe Romancing Saga 2 as a traditional JRPG that veers off the path early on and is obsessed with experimentation. It's even weird for me to call this a traditional JRPG, really, because it does so many things that might turn people off if they just take the game at face value. But this RPG has depth, not just in the way that it handles combat, equipment, and all of the other number crunching mechanics, but Romancing Saga 2 really takes its hands off the handlebars, pushes you downhill, and reassures you that you'll figure it out along the way. You're largely free to build your own party how you like, you can develop your kingdom and gear at your own discretion, and you can tackle the story in any order that you please, while also making decisions that will indeed change how things develop in the world. It's not as open as a Bethesda RPG per se, but it's not a linear path like Final Fantasy X either. The world really does react to what you do, even down to how strong enemies are. There really is a lot going on with this game, but the most unique feature to me is the roguelite nature of your main character. You'll likely play as dozens of main characters, as the game asks you to choose a new emperor after losing your entire party in a battle, or by moving the story along at certain points. And I won't bury the lead here, I love this game. I beat the remaster about a month before the remake came out, and I think it might be the best remake that I've ever played. I'll try my best to explain why that is, and let you know if this would be a game for you. Let's kick off the review with what I think is the most important part about Romancing Saga 2, gameplay. Gameplay is traditional turn-based combat where party formation is at the core. Once you're past the prologue, the game will task you with choosing a new emperor, which is basically your main character, and then it has you fill out the 4 slots of your party with the classes that you've unlocked to that point, which are unlocked by completing side quests around the world. After that, you'll need to outfit them with the equipment that you want them to use and the skills and spells that might be most useful to them. Each character comes with their own amount of battle points, or BP, that are used for both skills and spells, as well as their own pool of life points, or LP, which is essentially the amount of times they can fall in battle before being permanently killed. Yes, permadeath is a thing in this game. Sort of. And then there are formations. When you first start out, you'll have access to very few, but as you choose different classes as your emperor, you'll unlock new formations to be used based on the strengths of that class. Formations not only account for party placement and how likely each party member is to be targeted, but certain spots can also offer buffs, as well as enforce debuffs to your party members. And I can say with certainty that formations become a huge part of the late game strategy. Could you use one formation for the entire game? Sure, it's possible. Romancing Saga 2 doesn't like to tell you no very often. However, different formations will be far more effective against not only certain enemy types, but how the enemy parties are lined up as well. It's more appropriate to say that certain classes are far better fits for certain formations. So knowing your personnel is very important when it comes to choosing a formation. This means choosing either your party composition first or your formation first are both viable options, as either can be tailored to the former. Character development is one of the most important things when it comes to an RPG, and Romancing Saga 2 handles things a bit differently than normal. Instead of each character having an overall level that regulates stat growth in a linear fashion, characters here increase the level of individual weapon classes by using the appropriate weapons in battle. After each bout, you'll get a certain amount of tech points, and those points will feed into the weapons that were used in the fight by each party member. This really encourages you to use weapons that might not be the most effective in your current situation, just so you can keep that weapon class up to speed for that certain character class as you go. You can also hit multiple levels for that weapon in one fight if the tech points awarded are plentiful, just in case you're trying to bring your character up to speed late in the game. One of the things you may hear or read if you're looking into Romancing Saga 2 is that you shouldn't grind. This can be helpful, but I also don't think it's an absolute statement. It is true that if you decide to grind, you'll be raising your global level, which in turn will rank up the enemies across the map, making them tougher. Now, typically I'm not a big fan of level scaling, as I think you should feel like you're getting stronger, and beating up on low-level enemies, while not always the most productive use of your time, makes you feel good. And it shows how far you've come when you can one-shot an enemy that you used to struggle with. However, the reason I don't think grinding is necessarily bad in Romancing Saga 2, despite its enemy scaling, is because of its glimmer system. Possibly the most intriguing mechanic in the game, the glimmer system is really the driving force behind Romancing Saga 2's combat. This is how it works. Every weapon has its basic attack that doesn't cost any battle points to use. If you're using the correct class with the right weapon, you may be prompted at times to use certain attacks to possibly unlock a new skill for that weapon. This is represented by a light bulb next to the skill's name. If there's a larger light bulb next to the skill, that means you have a greater chance at learning a new skill by using that skill at that moment. This creates a gamble of sorts. Do you use the skill that you know will do the most damage, just to get out of the fight quicker? Or do you use the skill that might glimmer a new skill to add to your repertoire? Personally, I found that glimmering skills early and often was a good tactic, as it not only gave me an advantage in battle by having access to a more robust arsenal, but it also helped inform my party composition early on by making me lean towards classes that already had powerful skills unlocked. Of course, you may choose to focus your glimmering efforts on only a few weapon types and use multiple of those sorts of characters every time you form a party. Or you may opt to glimmer as wide of a skill set as you possibly can to give yourself options when you run into a stretch of enemies with odd weaknesses. As you can see, this really starts to show off the agency a player has in Romancing Saga 2. Battles are, as mentioned, traditional turn-based RPG combat. All characters will show up on a timeline, and turns will take place in that order. Players can use weapon-based attacks, magic, or healing items during their turns, and the game will let you know when an attack will hit an enemy's weakness, or if they'll resist it, which is a much welcome addition the remake provides that wasn't included in the original game. If you can hit a weakness or get a critical hit, you will fill up a piece of the overdrive attack gauge, that not only unleashes a beefed up attack, but it will be a combo attack between 2 or more party members. This is also new to the remake and brings a pretty big shift to the player's strategy, as some of these overdrive attacks can one-shot lesser enemies and take large chunks out of a boss's health bar. All of this is wrapped up in a roguelite presentation, where you can and will lose your entire party several times throughout your playthrough. This can happen in one of 3 ways. 1, your Emperor runs out of life points. 2, your entire party falls within one battle. Or 3, there's a time skip in the story, which is triggered by completing certain quests. This can lead to a strong imbalance of how long you're actually using the same party. I've had times where I've had the same party for 5 to 10 hours of gameplay, and I've had parties that have perished within 15 minutes because I built a bad party for that situation. I've even lost a party to a boss, built a new party that beat the brakes off that very boss, and then immediately lost that party because beating the boss triggered a time skip. This is probably the most important thing that you need to know going into this game. You will lose, and you will lose a lot, so long as you're playing the game on the classic difficulty, which I recommend as it's the way the game was meant to be played and how you'll see the truest design of Romancing Saga 2. Enemies will one-shot your party members on the regular, and there are all the other things that you have to worry about that come along with a turn-based RPG, such as AoE attacks and status effects. However, I personally find this less frustrating than the alternative of just reloading and trying again with the same exact party, the same attacks, the same items, and so on. Whenever I got humbled by a boss, I used it as a challenge to me as the player to change my strategy, and that is maybe the biggest thing that Romancing Saga 2 hits on. The modular method of plugging in a new emperor and building around them and the formation works really well. I've had moments where I go up against a sub-boss, get stomped on, come back with a brand new party, and beat the boss in one try. And I've also rebuilt my party after getting stomped, only to get stomped again. Yet, even if you have to go through 30 emperors or more to reach the end of the game, it still never really feels like you're losing progress, because all the levels that you earn stay with that particular class, and all the equipment that you find or develop stays in your inventory. Even the skills that you glimmer can be taught to anyone once they're learned and sealed by going to the training hall back at your base. Much like a Dark Souls title, no matter how unfair something seems, there's always a way to strategize against it and overcome. The story of Romancing Saga 2 is fairly wide open in how you can approach it. It sets up a basic premise. 7 heroes who once saved the land are sealed away to another dimension because the citizens became afraid of the heroes' immense power, worrying that the heroes would turn on the citizens once they had no more evil to wipe out, and now the 7 heroes have returned to seek revenge, hence the title, Revenge of the Seven. But something that this remake does that the original doesn't do is goes into further detail about the 7 heroes in the form of flashback scenes that you can find around the world. Each scene runs about 3 minutes and really does a good job of shading in the details of not only the events that led up to what happened to the heroes, but it also gives you a look into their personalities, which, as someone who has beaten the original game, I really appreciated. You will then get leads on things happening around the world, and you set out to investigate them, but really you only need to complete the quests that open up new areas and defeat the 7 heroes. The rest is really up to you, and the game rewards you by doing more, by giving you things that will ultimately help you defeat the 7 heroes. Romancing Saga 2 has what I like to call open map exploration. What this means is that you're given a large world, but it's full of segmented areas that you can freely move around to once you've unlocked them. Now, one of the few flaws I found with this remake is how the developers chose to onboard the player when it comes to quests and moving the story forward. Early on, the game holds your hand quite a bit. It tells you what to do, where to go, and how to do things. Now, on its face, this doesn't sound bad at all, but the game eventually lets go of your hand and tasks you to figure out how to progress things on your own. Sometimes this is pretty easy to figure out. After all, the original game told you next to nothing about how to advance quests compared to this remake. But still, I've seen people on social media claim that they've given up on the game because they're stuck in a certain spot, when they aren't stuck at all, and all they had to do was explore an area on the map that wasn't being pointed to by a marker, which I don't blame them for not knowing, as the game doesn't really encourage you to explore these areas that don't have a quest marker, but this happens more frequently as the game opens up. You can also lock yourself out of gaining certain classes by not doing things in a certain order or by having an ineligible emperor selected at the time. For those of you who can't stand not getting everything on your first playthrough, this is definitely not a game that I'd recommend for you. You have to be willing to let go and accept that multiple playthroughs are recommended to get the very most out of Romancing Saga 2. Not only will you find new classes out in the world, but you'll find materials that will help you develop new equipment, spellbooks that will get you new spells to develop in your incantations lab, treasure chests that contain items, equipment, and money, and you'll also be able to hunt down these little yellow cyclop dudes named Mr. S. Finding these cute little guys will fill up a roadmap board that unlocks new features as you go, such as telling you how many treasure chests are in one specific area and where they are. All of this makes exploring every nook and cranny of a new area worth it. Graphically speaking, it's obvious that Romancing Saga 2 just didn't have the budget of a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but it works. It gets the job done. Most of the time, it's quite beautiful to look at, save for some awkward facial animations. The landscapes can even be quite stunning, and overall I think developer Zine did a really bang-up job on all the set pieces. The character designs are based off the original artwork, and while some designs look a bit flat at times, I think overall they're quite nice to look at, and the graphics overall are very much in line with what you'd see from a Falcom title like the Ys or Trail series. The voice acting is a little hit and miss. There are some great Power Ranger-esque villains in the game, as one of my friends pointed out to me.
How could you not, when I possess the ultimate weapon? Many have stood in its way, but all who have now lie dead and buried. Why do you hasten to join them so? Whatever your reasons, I'm more than happy to oblige and play host to your family reunion!
But there are also some 90s era, really bad performances in there too.
Sea may have fallen. 6 heroes still remain. I fear the Empire will never be secure as long as they are left to their own devices.
But overall, the good outweighs the bad here. What really impresses me about this remake is how true to the original game it is. Yes, it adds content like new classes. Indeed, it updates some of the mechanics like being able to form your party from one location instead of having to travel all over the map just to add characters to your party. You can now unlock special abilities that give you different advantages, and the devs give you a spot to fully recover your battle points and save before going into a boss battle, both of which make the game a bit friendlier. But all of this is still done with respect and reverence for the original material, and a deep understanding of what made the original Romancing Saga 2 so special. And you really don't see that too often. I mean, even with the ridiculous amounts of remakes, remasters, and reboots that we get every year, it feels like some companies are ashamed of their turn-based roots and have this strong desire to make everything an action game. I like action games, don't get me wrong, but turn-based isn't the rusty anchor some seem to think it is. Seeing everything from this 16-bit adventure come to life in a 3D realm is pretty special, and Zine, the developer of this and the Trials of Mana remake from a few years back, is quickly becoming one of my favorite studios. Thankfully, this game is seeing pretty good success. On Steam, the game has an overwhelmingly positive rating, with a whopping 96% of reviews being positive. It seems like the majority of people have really enjoyed the game, and so have I. If you like sinking your teeth into a 60-hour game where the majority of that time is spent in combat or building your party, then this game is 100% for you. Especially if you're tired of every RPG turning into an action RPG. This is some home cooking that will leave you satisfied. But if you're looking for something that is focused on a story and top-notch production, well, you might want to wait for a deep sale to give this a try. I give Romancing Saga 2: Revenge of the Seven 4.5 stars out of 5.